All right, welcome.
Yeah.
Thank you, sir.
Sorry, hey, how's everybody? Sorry.
I'm good. How you doing?
Great.
All right, Paul, up, you should see
Oh, how are you?
everybody's name at the top. And
Very
I was
good. Very good.
great. I've given everyone a little bit of information on each other, but hopefully we can just keep this rolling as super conversational and laid back. The idea of the bridge is to exchange meaningful conversation with each other among the diaspora. I am Tina Farris. I'm a tour manager, and I have recently fallen more in love with traveling throughout Africa and actually building more of an allegiance with fellow artists. I started reading a book about written by Kutlwano Ditsele, and I decided I wanted to produce it. And that led me into finding and meeting Kutlwano. And Kutlwano and I have a lot in common and a lot of production in common. And so over the past 2 years since I went to South Africa to produce Global Citizen, the Mandela 100, I've been back 3 times since then. So part of doing the bridge was kind of a takeoff of me wanting to tour Africa as well. I've been a tour manager for Mr. Trotter here for the last 21 years, actually. And over those 21 years, we've rarely gone out to Africa. I think, Tariq, you did Black August once.
Yes, in 2001.
Right, and the amount of times we've gone to Australia or Europe or Japan, it just, the ideology that we couldn't do it in Africa was astounding to me. So I've been trying to figure out how to map out and etch out a scalable touring model. And since COVID came out, you know, that's kind of gone kaput. So the bridge is a part of that yearning to still want to connect with our counterparts. And so often you see the American side and we don't see the African side. So today we're going to feature Zethu Mashika from South Africa, Kutlwano Ditsele, who's a filmmaker in South Africa as well, and Paul Gladstone Reid, who is a composer in London. So thank you all for being here. Thank you, Tariq Trotter, Black Thought of the Roots, for being here as well. And we are going to get started. I'm going to pass over to my co-host Kutlwano to get some of what we have in common and some of our origin stories started.
Thank you for setting it up, and thank you for everybody for coming through. Yeah, so you know, it's crazy times right now with this COVID-19 thing. But you know, we've as artists, I think, and as human beings, we always find a way to find something to make, you know, special things out of difficult times. So for me, I'm excited about these sets of conversations and the knowledge share that's really been. I started doing it myself a few weeks ago, and it started to grow and grow, you know, locally. And just to take it back to kind of what Tina was saying, it really has been. It's like we got connected at the right moment. Actually, funny enough, when I met Tina, I was actually supposed to have been in LA, and when she was in SA, and I didn't go to LA, and I'm glad that that didn't happen, because then we got to link up. And the friendship has really just grown in leaps and bounds, and I'm really excited for these conversations. You know, for me, I always tell people my 2 big loves are film and music. And I was saying to Tina earlier, and Zethu will attest to this, the very first contract that we sign for any project that we do is the music composer contract. Literally, it's like the first thing that we do is like, who's doing the music, straight up front, you know, before we even sign our production contract with the broadcast, that we want to make sure that the music contract is done, because it's such a pivotal thing for us. So for me to be a part of this conversation with great composers and musicians like yourselves is a real honor, and I'm looking forward to this conversation and looking forward to the knowledge share that we can all put in, and hopefully there'll be great things that will come out of this as well for individual projects and, you know, collective projects as the time goes on. Yeah.
Great. So I want to get a little bit of everyone's origin story, like where you are from. Paul, can you give us a little insight on your roots?
Indeed. I'm British Jamaican, so I've been very much in connection with my Jamaican experience since an infant, and it's still very much a part of my daily life. I think I've been in contact with Jamaica 3 times today. When my family's from, both sides of the family come from 1 mile apart. Farming, but heavily into music. My great-grandparents were organists and choir masters in Jamaica, just outside of Mandeville, Porus. And around that area, in their day, and I guess up to about the 2000s, you had still a lot of the Mayalism, which is what they call the kind of syncretic religions, which all the kind of African nations came together to form, I guess, a kind of conglomerate religion, whether they were from Mandinka or Wolof or Igbo or Yoruba. And it's from these ceremonies, you have these people all dressed in white and they're circular dancers, that a lot of the traditions of what we know, reggae and ska and blue beat, really came out of vocal chants from those traditions, their kind of ritual ceremonies. And all of that sort of stuff kind of would happen around where my grandparents are from in Jamaica. So we had that. Then we had their kind of very strong kind of Anglican Eurocentric singing, quartet doo-wop stuff. So, you know, I was brought up in the UK, but would travel to Jamaica, had the church gospel side of things. Family came from an Adventist background. So like you in America, you have the Aeolian singers and Oakwood and Andrews, very much in that style. We used to jam the Pentecostal musicians. My family ran sound system. I think the first sound system we had in Sheffield was one of my cousins. So there's a kind of mixed mesh of classical, Caribbean, and then that goes into hip hop. By the time I was 17, I had my own kind of jazz orchestra, 25-piece, and went on from there and became a pianist. I was born in Sheffield, which is in the north of England.
Okay.
So, you know, by the time I came to London, I was performing on the classical and jazz scene and doing the odd collaboration with gospel on the side. I think one of my first kind of rap collaborations, I was 17 years old. That was with Jalan Nuruddin, the late Jalan Nuruddin of the Last Poets, wow. No longer with us. But yeah, I've gone on to be a composer, full-on orchestral concerts. So London Philharmonic, Royal Ballet, work with African dance companies, and very much into a kind of synergy. Did a fair amount of projects with the kind of griot tradition, working with the Debati family. At the time I was working with a composer, fellow composer musician called Tony Jegadane. We had a series called African Classical Music. So we worked a lot with the griot families from West Africa. And that kind of collaboration, which might have involved Tumano Debati or Umar Sangeri. 10 years ago, actually, we did a massive event for what would be the third Festac event, which the Festac, first kind of Pan-African fair cultural event that happened in Senegal 66 and then again in 77 in Nigeria. They did it in 2010 in Dakar. And I was fortunate enough to be the composer and one of the musical directors, but I composed the opening ceremony. We brought people from all over the African continent and the diaspora. We auditioned 15,000 people to come up with a cast of 1,500 people and performed in a 60,000-seater stadium with a 1,000 square meter screen of animation. And we had Yusa Ndour and the late Manu Dibango, now rest in peace, Angelique Akido and the Baba Mal. So that was a life-changing experience, especially working with the late Duda Naya Rose that had a 200-piece drum orchestra of a kind of African drumming that one has never heard in their lives. Amazing.
So so your grandparents moved to Sheffield?
No, my parents moved to Sheffield, but my grandparents, a lot of my family are still in Jamaica. Some are in Jamaica, some are in Canada, some are in America.
Sheffield, how did you find your way into classical music? There was
what was your first instrument? Like, what did you became a musician playing what?
The first instrument was voice. So my parents were in quartets and choirs. So it was all African Caribbean. So my father was in male voice quartets and male voice choirs, was actually a leader conductor, and my mother was also in the quartet with him, which is mixed quartet and also mixed choir. So my sisters and I, have 3 sisters, we were brought up to start singing on stage. I think I might have been 5 or 6 years old when that started happening. And at the time, the African Caribbean community were doing, they would hire a town hall once a month maybe, or once every 2 months, and coaches would come from all over the country. So you'd have a 1,500 to 2,000 seater venue of all kind of Black people dressed up, and there'll be choirs, pipe organists, someone playing the saw, and then us. So that really began the music. But because my parents were very musical and a musical household, it was really normalized. Guitar, piano. Eventually, my sisters, one of them started doing the trumpet, another one was doing the saxophone. Double bass came in, and I was fortunate to go to school as well, where there were a lower orchestra, upper orchestra, brass bands, wind bands, and music teachers that knew what they were doing. And a headmaster that was a guest conductor at the Sheffield Philharmonic. So, but I must say that in terms of classical music and brass band music and wind band music, that had already been pretty much solidified in the Caribbean from the 18th century with Black people playing it. And to go even further back, that obviously because of the Blackamoors' influence in Europe, what they call the Iberio-Latin American Baroque music was very much Blackamoor music that then was transplanted to Spanish and Portuguese colonies, where they actually had African musicians in paid employment within that music. In South Yorkshire, the largest nature reserve is called Blackamoor.
Wow.
And there's a lot of places which were affectionately named after the Blackamoor's presence. And Morris dancing, which is Moorish dancing, was done in blackface. And we didn't know why it was done in blackface, very much like the black and white minstrels so you'd have in the vaudeville days. They were in blackface. Wow. We were not told that actually that was a mimicry of the Blackamoors that were very much present across all of the British Isles, and were hugely influential in what became military music, especially with the brass, the trumpeters and the drummers, and being employed in the Tudor court. So across the Black Atlantic world, there is no new connection between wind, string, brass and percussion and the cross-pollination of African influence within Mediterranean Europe into Western and Northern Europe.
Right. Wow. Right. Wow. And was the thing you did in 2010 in Dhaka, was that your first time? Was that your first production on the continent, or like what? Like when was your first trip to Africa?
That was it. That was it. Before that time, musicians had come from Africa to London to collaborate with us. But this was straight in. I think the director, Kwame Kwiyama, we had been developing a Bob Marley musical at the time.
Oh, wow.
At the National Theatre, developing, all of his songs into a play. And we were waiting to hear back from the National Theatre when, in the midst of that flow, we were given a call. Well, he was given a call. Come out to Senegal, meet the government. We have an issue with this festival. We had to let some people go. We need some new people. Would you be interested in directing? Obviously, the answer was yes. He then called me. And because of my past experience I really wanted to have, you know, that kind of wind string brass percussion and vocal traditions from a multi-millennial perspective, because I know that what became the kora and the konting, we have the images of those instruments in temples in ancient Egypt and in the pyramids. And the image of the musician priest or the poet musician historian became the griot. And although I knew that the griot tradition very much in the Mandinka Empire became Islamized in 1270 under Sunjata, whilst the Wolos continued with their traditional religion, I knew that there was a multi-millennial heritage, which I wanted to tap into. Yeah.
Wow.
Okay.
You're a wealth of knowledge.
Right? I was like, taking notes, like, okay, I gotta look that up. I gotta look that up.
Yeah.
Zethu.
Yo, I feel like I should have gone first.
Bye.
I should have gone first, man. Like, wow.
No.
How do I follow that?
Tell us
Yeah.
where you're from.
Man, I'm from Benoni. You know, it's a small town just east of Johannesburg. I was born and bred in Benoni. My parents are from Mpumalanga, a province just next to us. And yeah, man, I'm currently, 36 years old? So I'm still pretty young compared to my man over here. I have,
How you know?
yo,
I mean, I think you're obviously young compared to me.
but yeah, man, my musical background basically started in drips and drabs when I was in the church choir. When I'm pretty sure I was like 6 or 7 years old. And it kind of died down from there. And then one day, a friend of mine, one of my best friends at the time said to me, listen, man, if you want to get these girls, bro, you just need to sing for them, bro. You can sing. So you just need to sing. And I honestly think that's where like a big chunk of it actually started, because I started singing around the school. I started making ringtones on the 3210, Nokia 3210, and I used to sell those for 5 Rand.
Oh.
And then I joined the church choir. And when I joined the church choir, that was like in matric. I was also playing a lot of soccer then, but there was this old piano sitting in the gym. And whenever I had a chance, I'd go play around with that piano, not knowing what I was doing. And that's how I started to teach myself how actually music moves around and all that stuff. And, you know, getting my way around the piano. I still can't play it, but that piano really like started the whole thing, you know? And then in my first year of tertiary, that's when I got my first pirated copy, I'll admit, of Fruity Loops, FL Studio.
Oh, wow. Wow.
Mm-hmm.
And that was Fruity Loops 3. And at that was the worst thing that happened for my mother. Because I was in tertiary and I literally stopped studying. Like all the studying just went right out the window. I was making music only and not going to class. And funny enough, my mother had bought a very basic computer before that, maybe a year or two before that, hoping that I'd become a computer scientist, not knowing that I'd use the computer as my main instrument, which is what it is now. I can't play any instruments. The only thing I play is the computer. And so it kind of backfired for my mom's in a way, you know. And so I got my first copy in 2003, and I just started making beats, one way, just beats. And I started exploring all these other genres, you know, rock music, Chinese music. And I didn't know that I was actually preparing myself to be a composer at a later stage, because my ability to tap in and out of genres it started from that point when I was just like messing around with all these tracks. And I later, 2 or 3, 4 years later, I got an opportunity to work with some local hip hop artists, H2O, Zulu Mob, you know, RJ Benjamin, you know, and I got to work with those guys, and all in that space of time, busy teaching myself as much as I could about different types of music. and getting to know the software that I use, which is still FL Studio, Fruity Loops, still today. And so I continued on. And then in 2009, I met a friend of mine. His name is Mfundo.
Excuse me.
Corona. And in 2009, I met a friend of mine. His name is, I had moved out of the house, and I took my chances in the streets of Joburg. Then I met a friend of mine whose name is Mfundo Mkize. He is a film director. And he needed like last minute help on his film, decided to help him out. And that's when I really got into film scoring. And it's from that point on that my whole world completely changed. And I decided to put everything into it. And in a way, I completely abandoned just, music production, normal music production in a way. And I went full on into film scoring. And it was in 2010 that I got, the end of 2010, early 2011, that I got my first feature film called Scaife.
Oh, wow.
And I scored it. I can't listen to it today because it was my first film. Please forgive me. But then immediately after that, I did another film called Zama Zama. And Zama Zama was actually the film that I got my first nomination for, a SAFTA nomination for. And from then on, it just snowballed. I started doing other feature films, and then eventually I was also doing some short films like from Australia, via Facebook, Australia, the US, did a Batman short film in the US. And then I met a lady called Desiree. Desiree is a legendary producer who put me in touch with Kutlwano. And then Kutlwano and I started working together on his series called The Herd and Imposter and The Herd Season 2. And what else? Now we're on Gomorrah. Yeah. And yeah, man, it's just been a great journey of just like learning different styles of music and just trying to get as much knowledge as I can on my own without the mentorship, trying to figure it out and not knowing any other composers of my skin color, in the field, and, not having anybody to really go to. So it was basically me just figuring it out, which is still the case right now. And yeah, man. And I think I'm glad I kind of went through this the way that I did, because then I know stuff that I can teach other people not to do, or things to, avoid and whatever, and teach the young ones not to have to struggle the way I did in a way, But yeah, man, that's basically my history, and that's how I'm here, just making music.
If I could interject, it's crazy what you just said now is, when Desiree said to me, have you heard of this composer, Zethu Mashika? And I was like, wait, that sounds black. Definitely sounds like a black person. I like that. So, and then she showed me that video that you did, that you were scoring. I don't know what film it was that you were scoring. It was the strangest thing.
Last one's out.
Yeah, for me, there are a lot of commercial composers that are black, but for drama, you need a specific ear, you need a specific sensibility. And so for me to know that there was a young black composer, because you had done some work for her for Abo Mama. I think you came in to help them with Abo Mama. And for me, I had worked for 10 years in the industry, had never come across a black drama composer. And you might still be the only one that I know that's fully working.
That's amazing considering the population. I get it. UK.
Yeah. There's a lot of composers who are doing commercials and whatnot, but for drama, there's and I've met some composers who do commercials, but there's a specific sensibility. And I think, speaking to what you were saying earlier about you were learning different things along the way, along your journey, and that led you into scoring. That's what I found I spoke to you, and when that differentiated you from the commercials guys, because I would listen to them, I'm like, there's no soul, and I couldn't explain. I'm like, there's no heart in what you're playing. It's beautiful, it's great, but there's no heart in what I'm looking for. And later on, Zethu, there's a way you can send some of the score that you did for The Herd. So we did the show called The Herd, and Zethu just like blew it out the water. And the reason how he blew, in fact, the music that Zethu did for the Herd literally changed or dictated the direction that we took in the pacing and everything around The Herd, because he created a track when we were still in pre-production, and when we all heard it, it was so clear. We saw the show. We could see the show before we shot a single thing, and that's what I meant by that soul that I'd never felt from other people. So I had to take it off, but yeah.
Yeah, man. I think part of the reason why there aren't and there haven't been many Black composers is because it's that, firstly, people don't even know that composition is a thing. And those who do know only know old white men, like really old, and when a Black person comes along, it's like, yeah, man, this show we're doing, we're not really looking for hip hop or kwaito, and that's like before you've even said anything or even done anything, that's what they're assuming that you're going to give. And that was one of the things that kind of like, that was my first introduction to the industry. It was okay, well, we don't know if you can do it. We just don't believe you can do it. And I had to then adapt. And firstly, I had to change the way I dress. I cut my hair, I grew the beard, and I put on glasses so that I could create a certain kind of image that would differentiate me from a hip hop artist or whatever, so that I could get the opportunity to actually show my work, which was unfortunate, but it's something I had to do. And then I decided that I need to find a strategy and a way to get the producers and the directors to listen to my work before I speak. That way, we'll be speaking from a point of familiarity now, because they know what I can do before I have to say anything. And, even now, it's still a thing. There's still not many of us, because there's just, I think film scoring is something that you make a spiritual decision with, and it's a way of life. It's not something that you can just like get into. It's something that you choose. And some of the hardships that come with it are things that some people are just not willing to, take on, and, it's just trying to figure out how the world works musically and working with psychology and all of these things that come into it that you just sometimes don't put it in when you're making commercial music sometimes. When I was making beats, it was just about, getting the beat to sound dope and getting as much as you can out of it. But with film scoring, you have to understand people. You have to know people. You have to know how the brain works. You have to know how they think, and you have to know why this melody will affect them in a certain way and bring out those certain things. And to do that, it takes years. And some people are just not willing to put in those years, and it's a complete lifestyle change. So, I think it's hard enough. And I kind of understand why there aren't many of us, but also because it's not something that has been put out there very much. People don't even know that this thing still exists. I mean, it exists right now. And so not many people know that they can get into it.
Like it's a job.
Yeah.
Tariq, sorry, go ahead. Tariq, could you tell us about your experience going from, performing, rapper, actor, and then into your new musical Black No More?
Yeah. For me, the transition from, I guess, performer into composer, arranger sort of happened, not by surprise, but I didn't realize sort of what was taking place as it was happening. The production Black No More almost fell into my lap, in that it was a project that was pitched to the Roots, like for the Roots as a collective to work on. And this was something that was brought to us over 5 years ago now by John Ridley and Scott Elliott. John Ridley, the Academy Award winning writer and screenwriter, director, and Scott Elliott, who's the director of this particular production. So they brought this project to us, and at the time when we took the meeting, I just finished, an acting job. I worked on some production that I thought I'd done pretty decent performance on, and that I thought John Ridley wanted to cast me in something. So, that was why I even took the meeting. I was like, it's about to be on. I'm going to be in, 13 Years a Slave. You know what I'm saying? And so, yeah, we took the meeting, and it was like, he had this book that was called Black No More that he wanted to turn into a musical for Broadway. And I was immediately sort of put off by it. I've never been a huge fan of musical theater or of musicals. As the Roots, we're able to sort of accept, or, historically, we've been able to accept any challenge and sort of rise to the task. So I was open to work on it, but I didn't think it was something that I would become, very passionate about. So as a point of reference, he used Hamilton, which I hadn't seen. None of us had seen at that point. Hamilton was still off Broadway. And what I didn't know about Hamilton was that it was a production in which most of the dialogue was rapped. And that was a deal breaker for me. It was like, I hate that shit. I don't want to do, anything where people are rapping the lines back and forth, So yeah, that being said, I went to see Hamilton, at the Public Theater before it sort of went to Broadway, just so I had a point of reference. And when I saw Hamilton, it opened up my mind to just the possibility, beyond what Hamilton was. I feel like Hamilton was great in that it was revolutionary, and it sort of it shattered very many perceptions that I had, and probably that lots of other people had about musical theater and about hip hop. You know what I'm saying? So yeah, I felt like Hamilton could serve as a dope entree for me into that world, and there was something. It could serve as sort of my roadmap. What to do, what not to do, what to do differently. So yeah, we started taking these meetings, and the rest of the Roots Collective, Questlove, our management, Sean G, and the guys, I don't know if it was a loss of interest or if everyone had just so much on their plate that they couldn't continue to take the meetings with the sort of consistency that I was able to. So people sort of fell off from attendance, and I found myself taking meetings on this, about this project, being the sole representative of the Roots, so to speak. And, in that, it was what I did was, it was almost it was something comparable to what you did, Zethu, in that the project was still very much in pre-production. It was pre-project, but I just went ahead and composed something based on meetings that we had taken and based on, my impression of the book. And from that, it was, I recorded 2 songs that resonated so much with the writers and with all other parties involved that the play was sort of built around those 2 original compositions that I did, and they've evolved into something completely different, but they've served as sort of the soul blueprint, for what has become this musical. And I have no formal musical training. I'm not like classically trained or anything. All the other musicians in the Roots are, but I sort of learned how to use my voice and how to write music, just sort of on the fly through trial and error. So, when it boiled down to just me sort of being the sole, like having the task of doing all the music for this thing, I had to call in someone who was classically trained. So I called in my brother, Anthony Tidd, who is, he's originally from UK, and we met him.
Go back.
Yeah. Oh, Tidd. So yeah, you know, Anthony, we've known him since the early 90s. We worked together, you know, even before we signed our first record deal, or maybe right after we signed our first record deal. But I've known him since like 92, 93. And, you know, he plays every instrument and is very much classically trained and is well-versed in composition and arrangement. So I brought him in, and we've sort of been a two-man team on this thing. And now it's evolved into a show that, you know, people are super excited about. And it's going to be, you know, once we're on the other side of all this, it's going to be coming, you know, to off-Broadway and ultimately to Broadway. And even, I mean, I don't know if this becomes the new normal or the next normal, we may have to figure out how to put this show on the same way they did that production you were talking about. And we just gonna have to do it from the crib, you know? But yeah, that's sort of, you know, what my transition has been. And but you now, very much like, again, what you were saying, Zethu, you know, I didn't want to be limited by my, you know, the fact that I was a hip hop artist. And I didn't want to, you know, serve, you know, whatever folks' expectations of me may have been, being a rapper and this being my, you know, first time sort of working in this realm. So I made it a point to, even though the original idea I think was for this to be, you know, almost a period piece set in the late 20s, early 30s, but where everything was rapped. I only made the compositions hip hop where absolutely necessary. And I went a more traditional route with everything else. And I wrote, you know, ballads and, you know, power rock shit and jazz stuff. And, you know, I sort of used this as an opportunity to showcase my range and, you know, just made it a more diverse and just rich experience sonically. So but by the time this show, you know, is actually open, I think people are going to receive it as like a journey through, you know, Black music, you know, with a hip hop aesthetic, you know.
Yeah. Love it.
That's solid.
Have you? I love a musical. I'm a.
I know you do.
You know, I love a musical. So I always likened like Hamilton or even what was it, the Carmen hip opera? They were kind of corny-ish. I always likened it to like Shakespeare. When you read a Shakespearean play, it's the prose is rapping. You know what I mean? Even when we acted it out. So it never seemed like a far stretch to me. It seemed pretty natural despite the dancing and the high kicks. But like even before this, Tariq, when Fela came out, that seemed like a good, you know, entryway as well, because, you know, at least it was music that you like, or it was more modern.
Yeah.
Hairspray.
I agree. I completely agree. Yeah, Fela definitely moved me, you know, in many of the same ways. You know, Fela just resonated with me because, I mean, I feel like Fela is my music, you know, and I've introduced so many of my counterparts sort of to the, you know, Fela's, you know, catalog. That you know, I feel like I just have some level of ownership to that. Yeah, I feel like it.
Everybody on Fela.
Yeah, my introduction to his music, it really changed my life and it changed my trajectory as a musician. So yeah, obviously when Fela the Musical came out, it was super impactful to me. And Bill T. Jones, who directed that musical, is my choreographer for Black No More. So it's sort of comfortable. I was really close, you know, I mean, well, Tina knows this, but I was close to, you know, get like scoring the understudy role, you know, for Sa, who played Fela in that production. I was going to be like, you know, the second Fela, the part-time couple days a week Fela. But it was, they were casting it at the same time that we were beginning Late Night with Jimmy Fallon, and we were just starting our TV gig, and my curtain call, it would have been cutting it too close for me to have to be at the theater every night by 6:30, when sometimes we would be finishing a few blocks away at Late Night around 6:30. So I think that was, you know, one of the only reasons why I didn't get that job. But, you know, had I gotten it, you know, then I may have just taken flight from there, I might not have done late night. I might have just it out and then
right. And away you go.
you never look back. But yeah. So
thank you. That leads me to the creativity process right now. A lot of us are working from our laptops, and in this COVID time, how has that changed, or has it made it a positive? For me, let me get my question straight. For me, I've been able to be more creative and focused versus having to spend time in a car to get somewhere to the next job and then try to focus. Has a part of the quarantine, aside from it being hectic and a travesty for lost jobs and lost food, etc., how has it been creatively for your processes? And Paul, you can.
Well, I've got to say, for me, and a lot of my my fellow artists who spend so much time on their own in a room, it's kind of been business as usual. I mean, God, I don't do it now, but I went for a stage when I go, as friends will say, I go ham. I would be awake for days by basically taking a power nap for 30 minutes every 5 hours, and then I'll be awake for 11 days, and I just kind of go into the madness of composition, and you can't get me out. On that level, on that level, it's kind of been no different. But what has changed is, like you're saying, there are those lots of meetings that you have to go to, and that travel time, and etc. With that being gone, in some ways, it's really been a blessing. I mean, I was supposed to be in where? I would have been in Nigeria at some point now. I'm in Jamaica at some point now. So that would have been good, to do with projects. But, and there were certain deadlines that were really tight, that now I've got a little bit more room to really go into it. So I can be positive with how that's affecting things. But yes, when a project or a number of projects where there's funding pending, suddenly everything's up in the air and you think, oh my goodness, there was a kind of couple of weeks of panic of, what's gonna happen? Oh. And then you're kind of like, everyone's in the same circumstance, right? So everyone's adjusting together, so yeah.
But Kutlwano, how are you able to act? You were in the middle of production, and South Africa's lockdown is a for real lockdown.
Our lockdown is, I'm actually breaking the law by drinking alcohol. We have no alcohol allowed. There's no cigarettes allowed. There is no walking outside is not allowed. There is no walking of your dog is not allowed. So you can bet that there's no production allowed whatsoever. So for us, it's I was having a conversation with the CEO of the channel earlier today. And it came at such a tricky time because we had just launched a show that has literally come through and just broken so many records in terms of audiences. Obviously, a big part of it is because everybody's home, but we've got so many eyeballs on our show, and then we had to just stop. We were given what did he give us? He gave us like 4 days for us to stop everything, the president. And that got us to a certain point. So, on a personal level, in terms of creating, it's been great because I'm able to work on the projects and the things that, we've been saying we'd work on, but never have the time to work on because we're always on set. So on that side, it's cool. But on the flip side of it is that we're not producing anything. So we're not shooting. So I've got 85 to 100 people that are sitting at home from my crew that are all itching. So, we of course respect what's happening. There's a lot of loss of life and there's a lot of health risks, but the biggest part is it's been a gift and a curse. The gift in that I'm able to work on things that I don't need to be, out for, but the curse in that we've got 100 or so people that are sitting at home, unemployed, not able to shoot. And also kind of like we have an audience that, we've got millions of viewers that have fallen in love with the show. And that show at some point is going to come to an abrupt end because we just never got enough episodes out in time. So it's a tricky place, but I don't know if we can shoot our show on Zoom. I don't think that's possible.
No.
How are these times comparable to times during apartheid there?
Man,
Like with regards to the restrictions,
regulation. It's funny. One of the projects that I'm working on right now is still in development. Is a documentary called "The Genius of Apartheid." Because the thing about apartheid is that, as evil as it was implemented in such a genius way. How do 2 million people overcome 40 million people in their own land with psychological warfare? So say what you want about it. It's a controversial statement, but there was something quite controversially genius about that system. And a lot of the things that the sadness of what's happening here is that you'll add to this as well, is that where we're staying, we kind of always felt like we live in a bit of a bubble. I always say to people that I feel like we live the black middle class live in a bubble in South Africa. We don't live in the real South Africa, and the real South Africa, I'll tell you, was experiencing COVID-19 lockdown completely different to how I'm experiencing it. I might joke and say I'm not able to go outside. I'm able to go to the shops and whatnot, back and forth. Nothing ever happens. In fact, I've been telling friends that all the time that I go out to get food, I don't see a single cop. I don't see anybody. The streets are empty. But in the townships and the shanty towns and the where majority of the black people are living, it's not the same thing. Some of them are well controlled and others are in complete havoc. So I think, and one of the saddest things is that our South African National Defense Force is out, and we've been seeing cases. In fact, we know of a case now of a man who was killed in his own home by the South African National Defense Force because they came into his house, and the rules are that you're allowed to drink alcohol in your home. You cannot, whatever you had when they locked it down, that's yours, and you can keep that. That's what the rule that everybody has understood was. Somehow the South African National Defense Force, who have, if you think about it, the last time they were really deployed was during the time Nelson Mandela was coming into power, and that was 30 years ago. And they really haven't been doing much. We haven't had much war. We haven't gone anywhere. And now they're coming out, and there's all this energy that feels like it had been bottled up. And a man was killed. A man was killed because he had alcohol in his home, and they wanted to show an example out of him, and they beat him, and they beat him to death. So I'll say that. I don't want to fully compare it to apartheid. I can't really, because I caught apartheid at the tail end of apartheid. But I grew up in another bubble. When I grew up in a town called Mafikeng, and Mafikeng was the only place in the 80s that South Africans had their own radio station and their own television station. That's where I was born from. So that's where I got it. So in the same way, I feel like there's a bubble that I'm living in. It's kind of like the bubble that I grew up in Mafikeng, where I always kind of feel like I'm on the periphery of it. I'm seeing people, I'm seeing on the news people being killed. Well, one person's been killed. It's one too many. And yeah, it's pretty real. And every day we're waiting to, today the president is going to come out and talk to us again about possibly another extension and possibly measures on how we can hopefully slow down the violence that these guys are doing. So it is a weird time in South Africa, and I think it's really exposed the underbelly of the inequality of South Africa, because that is the real thing, is that we're so unequal. We're the world's most unequal country.
Yeah.
So yeah, and this COVID-19 breaks my heart in that way, is that the poor are struggling.
They're seeing the worst of it, yeah.
Yeah, definitely. Poor people everywhere in the world are seeing, sort of the worst of this. It's impacting them in a completely different way. If you don't mind me asking, is there any logic? What is the logic in a ban on alcohol and cigarettes during, something like this?
What do you think, Zethu?
Oh, sorry. I'll say this because I'm not really sure. I'll just tell you what I think. I think the ban on alcohol and I think initially the ban on alcohol was more about the taverns and where people congregate
Okay.
to
Okay.
drink together. All right, so that easily spreads because there's hundreds of drunk people in the same space.
Right.
But I'm not actually sure why there's a ban when we're at home, but something to do with the possibility that alcohol actually weakens your immune system, which makes you more vulnerable to it. I'm not sure about cigarettes though, why cigarettes have been put into the mix, but I think those are the two main things.
I'll tell you, I think another one is, it's kind of what I was saying to the point earlier. By the way, I just found out that there's actually been 8 deaths, not 1, 8 deaths that are under investigation from the South African National Defense Force. I think one of the biggest things is exactly that, right? Zethu, if we think about it, our townships, and this is exactly how it is worldwide with Black townships. I'm sure it's the same in Jamaica, New York, and everywhere. Where are the most liquor stores? Where the poor
in the townships.
In the township where the poor live, so in the hoods. So I think that it's really, I think more than anything, I think it's a measure to try and control that because, in the hood, a lot of alcohol flowing through during this time might not be a great idea. Especially when when that's the majority of the country. We are the minority. The Black middle class is the minority. The majority of the country is poverty stricken, and that's where a lot of the alcohol is. So I'm guessing it's a note from the government to say, you know what, the places where we're going to struggle the most are in the ghettos. So let us restrict alcohol as a whole so that it might make it a little bit easier. But yeah.
I think in some instances as well, there's been a high proportion, even in Europe, of domestic violence for a lot of people that are unaccustomed to being in the house together all the time. They find themselves locked down with an abusive partner. Add alcohol to that and people being concerned about where their next paycheck's coming from, where the next meal's coming from, that could become explosive in some instances.
Yeah. Another thing is, a big statistic that came out is that, there have been less violent crimes since the stop of sale of alcohol. So in South Africa, in fact, there was a day, somebody had told me recently, I can't remember exactly what it was, but it was the first day we survived. I think it was a period where we survived something like 18 hours without a single report of a violent act. And it was the first time in I don't know how many years. Might have been 8 hours or it might have been 3 days or something like that. But it was like there was a drastic drop. And we're talking about a country that has got violent, reported all the time. So I think it's, there are a number of reasons. I think we just have to be honest that alcohol in our country, well, not just in our country, in poor communities worldwide, adds to exactly what Paul is saying as well. It adds to a lot of the dangers and a lot of the issues that people already have. So they just figured we got to deal with other things. Let's take this out.
How would you guys feel if they opened outside back up? And interpersonal sort of interaction is reinstated, but this sort of prohibition, remains in effect.
For me, that remains the scariest part. Is all of us being
that's a concern. That's a concern of mine too. Like you feel like certain things take place and certain things are allowed to take place, so that certain other laws make more sense to be put into effect. Certain other restrictions are more likely to be put into place. And I just wonder how much of this newness, how many of these new sort of regulations stand the chance of remaining once it's all said and done.
Right. Like 9/11 changed how we travel completely.
Yeah, forever. Yeah, exactly.
100%.
Although I feel like the wine community is so thriving in South Africa that they'd be hard pressed to shut that all the way down. And that's led by the whites too, right?
Yeah, they'll camp that shit back on.
Well, they're saying never let a good crisis go to waste.
Yeah.
And I think in these systems, there's a time of, curbing civil liberties on the basis of freedom. And I think it's always been an issue between freedom and safety, and making people believe that if their freedom's taken away, it makes them more safe. And that's, I think, something that humanity always has to be wise and to rile against, in fact.
Yeah, I agree. I totally agree.
So before we're getting to the end of our hour, I wanted to ask another question. How is between all of the artists here right now, what's our bridge? And do you find that there is a collective Black conscious when it comes to your creative choices? I know we identified Kutlwano when you said you weren't finding the soul was missing when you were looking for a composer. How does that influence you, Paul, or you, Tariq? I know Black No More is a Black play, but when we're working as the minority, are you the person that gets asked, Paul, to come to when they need the Black composer, or what do you bring to the table for a lot of these major productions that are, in a white world?
I mean, it's interesting because yes, I do. I have often got that. We're doing something that kind of vaguely has a kind of a Black thing. You're the person to come to. But I think I've always kind of led as an artist as well, and because I, for my teens, was performing in a concert context, it meant that I've done enough as an artist that decides he has an idea that he wants to pursue, and then he creates it and then makes it happen, and then buy tickets and on off we go. So when it's been things like a ballet or a big production, I've been a driving force in the formulation of the idea, and then on a producer level, getting the finance together, and as you're going along, you learn about marketing and all this kind of stuff, so you kind of know how to make your thing happen. And I'm very much interested in, I know that there's a space. Years ago, people still talk about it. I think it was the end of the 90s. There was a gospel concert, but I brought an orchestra in with the pipe organ and the whole thing, and one of the Debate family was there. And I did a symphonic version of Exodus, Bob Marley's Exodus. And which people saw, it wasn't recorded. Well, I think it was recorded, but somebody has a tape which they've never allowed me to have. But anyway, people still talk about this because it was so unheard of. And I think we had like 3 encores. So here it is. I think we have so many stories that are trans-historical. Whether we're going from ancient Nile Valley civilization, ancient Delta, Niger Delta, into the diaspora, the Americas, we have epic stories. We have incredible sense of movement and singing. We have all the musicians we need of every single genre. Mm-hmm. And we know how to put on spectacle. So I'm like, right now, it was last year, I worked with a film director, Isaac Julian, an artist, on my 5th project with him, and it was Frederick Douglass. I needed a wonderful 10-screen installation film of Frederick Douglass, and that inspired me to take my music forward, to work with the Douglass family and to do the Frederick Douglass Symphony, the ballet, and the opera. So I'm in that. I've composed like 2 hours, 3 hours worth of music so far, and I'm going to keep going. And also to do with what happened 10 years ago, we did a stadium theater. We had 40,000 people in a stadium. There was no program of this musical spectacle that we had, but they were cheering in all the right places. So I think there's an uncharted area of entertainment and cultural experience that crosses the diaspora, that we are yet to invent. And maybe when we can gather together in large audiences or not, there's epic storytelling that involves composition and singing and choreography that isn't ballet or opera in the Western sense, but has elements of that and is something else. And the dancing and the choreography can be, the rapping can be in there, the hip hop, the whatever else can be in there. I think it's more about, you know, when you're a media producer, you've got a set script and, you know, you do what's right for what needs to be on screen. But I think whatever field anyone's in, I think every artist needs to have a whole bunch of ideas of stories that they want to tell, where they just let rip. And I think every artist, doesn't matter how much they're getting paid on a particular field, that they shouldn't limit themselves just to what they're getting paid to do, because there is an audience that wants a whole new immersive experience. And that, you know, I'd encourage every musician, artist to have some outlandish project that they can also work towards, and that really stretches their ability. And within that, being conscious about this bridge. You know, finally, I'll say this. I was asked to do a project, look at doing a project about the Windrush. We've got this whole history in the UK. Caribbean people come to the UK and have been trying to kick everyone out.
25 something for ticket price. That's all I remember.
So there's all that's going on. I was asked to do a piece, and I decided, inspired by, you know, Professor Paul Gilroy in his book, The Black Atlantic, I decided I wanted to do Black Atlantic Symphony, and we've got a black orchestra here in the UK called Chineke. And so when I started kind of working on that, and it's kind of early days right now, I decided that within that, in the English-speaking world, sometimes we've got an issue with the black experience because we exclude the Portuguese-speaking and Spanish-speaking and French-speaking. And I thought, well, in Black Atlantic Symphony, especially where there's a choir, I've got to find a way of working with those in Central and Latin America, as well as those across Africa, and both Francophile and what have you, and make a concerted effort to program in the bridge in the composition.
Mm-hmm.
So, you know, when you're talking about the bridge, I think that can become an inspiration, a creative inspiration to say, hey, wait a minute, there's all this talent. How am I working with people from Latin America, Brazil, or, you know, Mandinka, whatever? How can I include kids that are doing crumping in LA in my opera? Mm-hmm. How can I just, you know, just find ways to bridge as artistic practice and praxis, and then it will become normalized.
Normal, right?
Yeah,
right.
Yeah, I think that's amazing that you said all of that stuff, man. Like, it's I think you did mention that, you know, in the case of a production of a script, you know, you kind of limited to doing very specific things. But now and then, I think you have an opportunity to bring in a perspective, an African perspective, in a non-African context. And that brings about something that's different and fresh that they haven't seen before, because they're used to what their own perspective. On Queen Sono, one of the characters is a Russian kind of like oligarch type of lady. And what I kind of thought about was, okay, so I kind of have to write a Russian sounding piece of music. But what I did was I brought in a purely African element to the thing, where we've got something here called Isthakazelo. Isthakazelo is kind of like a family praise poem. So your culture, your surname will come with a praise poem that comes with that surname. And it sometimes links with other surnames, but it's like a praise poem of that particular family, all right? So sometimes you'll say Isthakazelo Sako, your Isthakazelo, sorry, now speaking Zulu, sorry. You'll say your Isthakazelo during celebrations and all of these things, but it's just like your family pride. Now, I don't know if they have this in Russia. What I did was, when I was writing the piece of music, I thought, why don't I write her family Isthakazelo, write the melodies to it, and then get somebody who's Russian to sing that as part of her theme. Now, I've brought in that element, that African element to the thing, that kind of added a totally different, a very spiritual dimension to her theme. And that you're not going to get that with, you know, the conventional way of, you know, film scoring and stuff. And I think the thing that we bring a lot is just that perspective that the world just has not seen, and the spectacle that you were talking about, Paul, that, you know, going crazy about it and all that stuff. But talking about the bridge on my end, at the moment, it's still been about figuring out this landscape. You know, even as far as I've come, it's still about figuring it out. And I think the first part of it is just putting it out there that this is actually a thing, and, you know, trying to encourage the younger guys to actually get into this so that there's more of us that can actually play. Right now, there isn't as many. And so it's hard to connect those bridges without having that interest. And that interest is the hardest thing to actually break through. So yeah, man, I think those are the limitations mostly, but I think just carrying on doing what we do, eventually the word gets out, and hopefully we'll have more players in the game.
Agreed. You know, I'm here because I'm interested in building, you know, these sorts of relationships with you guys, my fellow artists, and just with like-minded individuals, in hopes of coming to a deeper sort of understanding of and a deeper appreciation for one another. I'm interested in creating more of a presence, you know, both personally and with regards to the roots, not only in South Africa, where I've collaborated with, well, I've been to South Africa once. I did Black August, but that was in 2001, and it's a very different place now than it was, you know, when I was there. I worked with Casper Nevis, you know, recently. I'm currently collaborating with this guy, Stogie T, who's an artist from South Africa. But yeah, I mean, not only in South Africa, you know, just in Africa in general. I've been recently working with, you know, with Seun Kuti in Nigeria. And on Tina's advice, I reached out to a producer from Ghana in UK named Jules. And he and I are collaborating, and I feel like that's what it's going to take. It's going to take some cold calls and, you know, just some DMs and some reaching out, like, hey, I'm a huge fan of what you do. I respect what you do. I feel like, you know, we're on the same page. Let's work. Let's collaborate. And that's the bridge. The bridge is our commonality, and what we have in common is that Blackness. It's you know, it's our Africanness, and in that there is a strength and a resilience, and I feel like the denominator is our ability to overcome adversity. So yeah, I mean, I feel like, yeah, we need more of this, and we need more sort of thinking and creating, you know, outside of the box, outside of our comfort zone, outside of, you know, a pay scale. And I think this is, you know, this has been a beautiful thing to sort of to make happen. What's up? What is that?
Awesome.
Oh, cool. Thanks.
Thank you guys so much. I to add to that, I feel like often we're talking about normalizing and making things Black, but we've been taught that the default is white, and it just is.
It's not. It doesn't have to be.
Well, I think on that point, the work that it takes for us to establish a transhistorical, multimillennial body of knowledge and education, considering that Black nationalist Pan-Africanism really took off from the 18th century with Paul Kofi, and, you know, re-establishing, repatriating people to Sierra Leone. And, you know, 15 million Africans going to Latin America and all of that. We've had encounters for quite a few centuries. It's not new, but the way that we talk about our story, we tend to speak in decades rather than centuries.
Right.
We ourselves are not comfortable with with histories of centuries and histories of millennia. So we keep breaking things to fit with a commercial imperative. And yes, of course, there's a commercial imperative with popular music. But so much of how we've used music as historically within our ancestral lineage has got nothing to do with show business. And the kind of, you know, ancestral shamanistic traditions, altered states of consciousness, all of that sort of stuff. We have been very active in a kind of ethnic cleansing of our own culture on the basis that can that be bought and sold to international audiences? It can't. Oh well, then it's no use to me. And I say this as a case in point. The Frederick Douglass project, I ended up writing, I don't know, like almost 100 pages of research just for that. And whilst doing my research, I visited the Bethune-Cookman University. I was doing an artistic residency in Florida. And I gave a talk, their wonderful choir. And I went through this whole history of African American music. And I used the terminology Africans of the Americas. Just to give acknowledgement that, you know, if Igbos are in North America, Central America, South America, and the Caribbean, that Igbo diaspora already shares a root. But if the people, descendants of them, are hell-bent on not acknowledging that, they're going to start fracturing the knowledge. And I did a little bit of hymnlining in this class. And at the end of it, I asked the teachers if this choir studies hymnlining, since the South is just next door. And they said no. And this is a HBCU.
Wow.
And in fact, what was said to me by the head of voice, and he spoke quite emotionally, was that, you know, really they have been taught to train out of Black people their Blackness. And, you know, this chap had been one of the Black soloists at the Metropolitan Opera at the same time as Catherine Battle and Jesse Norman. And he said, there's one young man at the back of this choir, and he has the voice for centuries, the voice of the ages. And I promise you, from this day forth, I'm not going to train it out of him. The Fifth Jubilee singers were overheard singing in a way that they don't sing on stage. And the promoter once said to them, why don't you sing like that on stage? I said, no, that is for us. Which means that the singing that they did on stage, which was to get money, raise money from white audiences, they had created a white version for them. But that white version has gone on to become the choral tradition at HBCUs.
Right.
Where they have decided to not teach a trans-historical, Black nationalist, Pan-African, multi-millennial history of Black music and performance. Despite the fact that many PhD professors have written those theses. We have recently lost Akinuba, one such great composer, Nigerian, and professor that can speak at this level. If we're only teaching people how to make hits that go in the charts, but there's not really much that you need to learn to do that, as intricate as it is, which means that the majority of our musical heritage, we're going to leave on a scrap heap. Because so basically when it comes to the bridge, if HBCUs do not have a unique syllabus and pedagogy that represents a trans-historical, Black nationalist, Pan-African body of knowledge that weaves together thousands of years of musical practice, that's on us.
Right.
We need to start bridging that so that when people go to a HBCU or online courses, they are getting a very different education of our music. Because in the same way that I can talk about where the reggae chop or the ska chop came out of was Maoism, a syncretic Pan-Africanist form of religion in the Caribbean. You'd be hard pressed to hear that from any reggae class. So I think it's on us that we need to start bridging our heritage and honoring our ancestral lineage and normalizing a body of knowledge which is thousands of years old and will go on for more millennia.
Awesome.
I agree.
Thank you. Thank you, Paul. Sir Paul.
Yeah. Oh yeah. Well, yeah. I was gonna say, I look forward to, you know, continuing this rapport and to getting to tell some of those stories, you know, with you all, getting to tell some of those stories together. But before this ends, I did want to ask Paul her saying Sir Paul just reminded me, what is an MBE? You know, for those of us, you know, who
basically it's we in the UK we have, like many countries, you have national medals, awards for certain things, like I guess I don't know, congressional medals in the States, etc., or that sort of stuff. So an MBE is a category of award which is given by the monarch for services to a particular area. When it's given, it tends not to be simply you doing your job really well in that area, but that you've used it in a particular way that uplifts society.
Wow.
So, you know, I have, one such honor, and it has a lot to do with, I've done a lot of work with music and personal development and psychological healing with inner cities. And that's included people from homeless to mental health to gangs to ex-child soldiers from Congo to Rwanda, where you're really, and in my way, the whole African tradition about how you can bring people back into frequency and back into wholeness has been a lot of my practice. But extending that, it has had a lot to do with promoting the way that British Commonwealth, or, you know, this whole kind of slave history and this kind of negative history of British Empire and slavery, European conquest, of how we bring people back to some form of harmony through the arts. And, you know, one doesn't do their work to get awards and stuff, but along the way, I guess people notice what you've done and think that, you know, you've helped to help society in some kind of way. So yeah, I was awarded an award some years ago by Her Majesty the Queen, and I subsequently, well, before that actually, I'd done a few projects which included senior members of the royal family as well. But you know, there's things that people be applauded for, and other stuff that would be ignored. But
no,
you know,
it's amazing. It's amazing to be, you know, to be recognized in that way, though. You know, wow, that's dope, man.
Paul, do you have an Instagram?
So yeah, so I've been kind of bad as I've been going through some changes and with my music and stuff. All my social media's been down. I only literally went back onto Facebook 2 weeks ago, so everything is off. But after this, goodness me, everything's going to be back on as quickly as possible because, you know, come on now. So yeah, I look forward. And I did give you a little blast of what I'm working on at the moment, Tina. And but yeah, I'll be back with you all on social media very shortly.
Thank you. I appreciate you being here. Zethu, how can we follow you?
Yeah, I'm on Instagram and Facebook and Twitter. Zethu_Mash for Instagram and Twitter. And yeah, you can check out my website, zethuMashika.com.
Wonderful. Kutlwano? You have 2 Instagrams. You got like Kutlwano, the filmmaker. Like, which one is?
Mine is the filmmaker, THA _ well, both of them are not spelled. So THAFILMAKA on both Twitter and Instagram. And I want to say that for me, it's an honor again to be having these conversations. I really want them to continue. I mean, you know, part of the bridge is for us to be able to share great knowledge, but also to make great work. And if I can see myself sending some images to the 3 gentlemen that are on this that can come back with some incredible music, that is really an awesome, you know, that's something that'll be epic, you know, and it'll be a big goal for something like the bridge. So yeah, so thank you all for being here.
Yeah.
Tariq, you're at Black Thought.
Yes, I'm at Black Thought on, you know, everything, but I think I'm locked out of my Facebook. I don't use Facebook that well. So you know, if you want to reach me, you can reach me at Black Thought on Instagram or Twitter. And yeah, it's been an honor and a pleasure. You know, just thank you. Thanks to
Me too, man.
Thank you all. And
Thank you guys.
This episode of The Bridge will be on the Roots YouTube channel this Friday at noon Eastern time. All right. Thank you guys so much. This is the best. I really appreciate you guys pulling it together.
Salute, salute. Thanks, guys.
See you
Thank
soon.
you.